This is Jamie Bernstein. You're listening to Everything Fab Four on Salon.com.
Welcome to Everything Fab Four, a podcast focused on fun and intelligent stories about the Beatles. I'm your host, Ken Womack, music culture columnist for Salon.com and a Beatles scholar and historian. No other band, or popular phenomenon for that matter, has enjoyed the global impact the Beatles have and continue to have more than 50 years later. They are part of our human fabric. They created music that continues to bring people together, and just about everyone has their own Beatles story to tell, some that are surprisingly deep and unexpected. This show seeks to draw those stories out in interesting and insightful ways. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story. Our listeners are going to want to know the following. Is Revolution 9, is that a good soundtrack for a makeout party, or does it just create terror?
No, it just is frightening. I think anybody who actually was making out stopped, and I was not kissing anybody at that moment. But I think you would have probably stopped in your tracks what you were doing, especially when the little girl voice comes on. If you become naked.
Today's guest is Joan Osborne, a Grammy-nominated multi-platinum American recording artist. A native Kentuckian, she moved to New York City to attend film school at NYU in the late 1980s, dropping out after becoming involved in the city's downtown music scene. Her life took a fateful turn after she sang at open mic night at the Abilene Cafe. Soon afterwards, she landed regular gigs in the East Village, playing alongside other acts such as the Surreal McCoys, Spin Doctors, Blues Traveler, the Holmes Brothers, and Jeff Buckley. In 1991, Osborne took matters into her own hands and formed her own record label, Womanly Hips, for which she released her first album, Soul Show, live at Delta 88. She began touring the Northeast in support of the LP, amassing a devoted fan base in the bargain. On the strength of this grassroots success, she signed a recording contract with Mercury Records' Rick Chertoff. In 1995, she made her major label debut with the album Relish, which soared into the top 10 on the back of One of Us, the international hit that propelled Osborne to stardom. In the ensuing years, she has been nominated for 8 Grammy Awards while touring the world. She has performed duets with such luminaries as Luciano Pavarotti, Bob Dylan, Stevie Wonder, Patti Smith, Emmylou Harris, and Isaac Hayes, among others. In addition to co-headlining Lilith Fair, she has toured with Mavis Staples, the post-Jerry Garcia Grateful Dead, and Motown's Funk Brothers, while also performing for the Dalai Lama at his monastery in India. She also regularly records and performs with Trigger Happy, founded by Black Crowes drummer Steve Gorman. Osborne's history of political activism includes her work with Planned Parenthood, which honored her as Woman of the Year in 1997. This summer, she will go on tour in support of her latest album, Nobody Owns You. Welcome, Joan Osborne. When did it all start for you? Were you a prodigy at birth, or when?
Well, I did sing as a child. I would go out into the yard. I'm from Kentucky, and I grew up in an area that had lots of woods around, and so I would go into the woods, and I would have conversations with the birds, where I would sing to them and try to get, like, they were always singing to each other, and I would try to step in and be part of that conversation, and in my little girl's voice. And I remember doing that just regularly when I was a kid. I also sang in a choir in school, a lot of old English madrigal songs, and like 6 and 7 part harmonies. And that was, I think, a really good training for me to learn about singing harmony. And, I listened to rock music as a teenager. I liked The Who, I liked the Rolling Stones, I liked the Pretenders, liked the Beatles. I think the first John Lennon record I ever bought was Shaved Fish, which was a collection of his solo hits. So I was familiar with him from the age of like 13. But then it really wasn't until I moved to New York that I got seriously into music and into really like the blues and roots music scene that was happening in New York in the 80s and the early 90s.
Oh, very cool. Shaved Fish, the last Apple record, I believe.
Was it? Oh.
I think it may be, yeah. It was John fulfilling his contract so he could go on hiatus, as he would.
And be a stay-at-home dad, huh?
That's right. And well, speaking of which, of course, you're a regular guest at the Lennon Tribute. I've seen you there before. And the winner, very well deserved, of the Real Love Award.
Yeah, that was exciting. It was exciting, of course, to get that award. And I was very happy that I could bring my own teenage daughter who, most of the time she kind of thinks like I'm super nerdy and not cool at all. So I was trying to convince her that I'm at least a tiny bit cool by bringing. I had to force her to come to that thing, but I was glad that I did.
Well, much deserved. And speaking of Beatles, were you an early adopter, or did that happen later in the 80s too? When did you were there for Shaved Fish?
Yeah, and I remember actually, I think when I was even a little younger than that, there was a friend in my town who would give these like sort of makeout parties in the basement when I was like 11 or 12 years old. And I was not a popular kid at that age, but I got invited to one of these parties. And at a certain moment, they turned off all the lights and playing Revolution 9, yes. And, we were all like 12-year-olds sitting in this dark basement as this crazy, sonic thing unfolds. And I remember being very sort of frightened and titillated and, the whole kind of like sitting next to a boy when you're 12 in the dark and then this music, and it was all mixed up together in my head. So I definitely knew about them. And I think listening as I did a little bit later on to that particular record, what's the Beatles, or what people call the White Album, because all of the songs on it are so different from each other, I think I sort of internalized that. And when it came time for me to make my own records, I felt like, you don't have to make all of your songs sound the same. You can have a very wide range of different kinds of material on a record. And, hey, the Beatles did it. So if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for me.
Okay, our listeners are going to want to know the following. And so before we talk about your own wide range of music, it's very diverse and interesting in its own regard. So is Revolution 9, is that a good soundtrack for a makeout party, or does it just create terror?
No, it just is frightening. I think anybody who actually was making out stopped. And I was not kissing anybody at that moment. But I think you would have probably stopped in your tracks what you were doing, especially when the little girl voice comes on. If you become naked, I think that's going to freak you out if you're a 12-year-old kid trying to kiss somebody around your braces. And, it's a little too on point, I think.
I think I'd be, making sure there were proper exits at that juncture.
Yeah, the backwards vocals were just like, that to me was really terrifying.
Yeah, I would think Donna Summer or something would be better.
Anything would be better, man.
So you go to New York in the 80s, which is an interesting time, of course, and I know this is going to sound like cliched in the industry, but it is a kind of interesting time because you have this kind of second new wave taking place, the second British invasion, you have TV, you have this kind of synth-oriented rock taking place in a big way. That how was that for you as an artist with your catalog, which we know so well? Did you feel like a fish out of water, or did you find home in that?
I mean, I kind of wasn't really paying attention to that so much at that point in my life. You know, I didn't own a television. I was a poor student. When I moved to New York, I moved to go to NYU, and had very little money, so I didn't own a TV. I certainly didn't have cable TV, and I wasn't really listening that much to that stuff that was happening. When I got into music, I was sort of involved. I became involved accidentally in this blues and roots music scene that was happening in New York at the time. And so I was, running around trying to find Etta James records and Howlin' Wolf records, and listening to Al Green and listening to Tina Turner and Marvin Gaye and Otis Redding and Muddy Waters and B.B. King, and those were the people that I was fascinated by and was listening to. So I was not so much attuned to the kind of stuff that you're talking about, the sort of new wave, and it might have been in the air a little bit on the radio coming out of a taxi, but it was just as likely to be some salsa thing pumping out of somebody's car window going by in the street, so that it was just a very small part of what I was hearing.
Interesting. So yeah, while there's this MTV revolution taking place, you're sort of finishing your musical or beginning a different musical education.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it was a great musical education because at the time, this was pre-internet, this was pre any sort of online existence. So things happened in real life, and you would go out to a club, and you would go from one club to the next, and a bunch of different people would be playing. And there were so many clubs to play in and to see your friends play in and to try to get gigs in and to go to open mic nights or open jam sessions in. And it was very much a training ground for me at the time. And so much of it was centered on blues and also centered on roots music. And, some of it was more traditional, but you also had bands like the Surreal McCoys, who were this very twisted kind of country band. They were all great players who had, a lot of chops, but they had this very weird, twisted sense of humor too. So it was a, very unique kind of version of American roots music that was happening in New York at that time.
You said accidentally found this scene. Did you find it through NYU? No.
I got invited to go out for a drink by this cute guy in my building, so we went to the closest bar to where we were living, and it happened to be a blues bar. And there happened to be a guy playing piano after the band was finished, really just for himself and the handful of people that were in the bar. And this guy that I didn't know very well dared me to go up and sing a song and said, "Oh, I'll buy the beers if you go up and sing with that guy." And I don't think he had any notion that I, had a singing voice or anything. I think it was just him trying to, stir the pot somewhat or be like, cool and daring and funny. And so I did. I went up and sang a Billie Holiday song with this piano player. And he, the piano player was like, "Oh, that's pretty good. You should come back. We have an open mic night here once a week." So I started going to the open mic night and meeting other musicians and finding out about other places that had open mic nights. There was a bar called Dan Lynch on 2nd Avenue and 14th Street in Manhattan. And I went down there, and Sherman Holmes of the Holmes Brothers was running an open jam session on Sundays. So that's how I met the Holmes Brothers, who, if you don't know, are an incredible blues, gospel, Americana group who were sort of the kings of the scene at that time and went on to have a much wider career. But, that's kind of how I got into it, was just, being dared to sing and then finding out about these places where you could have an open mic night. And then through that, finding out about all the other clubs and bars where people were playing and going out and seeing them and just getting involved in it in that way.
And getting free beer.
Sometimes I would, yeah. Although I didn't drink a whole lot, I was not a big drinker.
So how does that then translate to you getting paid gigs and deciding that, wait a minute, there could be a career here?
I mean, it was a gradual process. Some of the guys that I met at these open mic sessions, they were playing, with bands of their own, and, would hear me sing and say, hey, maybe we should do something together. And, and that happened enough times that I was able to kind of cobble together a band, sort of as a backing band for me, but also some of the guys would sing some songs, and just to try to have some sort of band. And then I would, and we started rehearsing, made little cassette tapes of our rehearsals, and then I took those cassette tapes around to all the clubs and tried to leave them with the right person, and trying to be like a little businesswoman and get myself a gig. And of course that took forever, because most of the people were just like, sure, I'll listen to it, and then they would leave it somewhere, or never get back to me. But eventually there was a place called the Wonderland Blues Bar, and the guy who booked the shows called me up and said, oh, we have a cancellation, can you play this Monday night next week? And and I was like, yes, we can do it, and not knowing, of course, if any of the guys were available, but just said yes. And so that was the first gig that I ever played, was at a club called the Wonderland Blues Bar. And I was totally terrified, and I grew up in this little town in Kentucky, so just the thought of being on a stage in New York City was, pretty intimidating. And then, I was kind of insecure at that time, so I couldn't open my eyes on stage, and I grasped the microphone because it was the only physical object between me and the audience, and so that was my little security blanket. So I grabbed very tightly onto the mic stand, and was just terrified, but I made it through. And the guy who booked the shows was there, and he thought it was good enough to offer us another couple of gigs next month. So, and then I took the little ad from the paper, the Village Voice, where they listed the clubs and listed who was playing. And then I took that around with my demo tape back to all the places that hadn't gotten back to me and said, hey, see, we're playing at this club, and can we, if you have any open nights or whatever. So just very, very slowly, one little step at a time, I was able to, get to a point where I was playing, 4 nights a month, and then it was 10 nights a month, and then it was 5 nights a week at a certain point, And at that point, I quit my day job and decided that I was going to leave school and focus on music.
Which must have seemed like a daring kind of move at the time.
Well, it was, and my father and mother were not super excited by that choice. My dad especially sort of pulled me aside when I was visiting, back at home, and he was like, you're so smart, and you could be a lawyer or a doctor, and why are you spending your time doing this, and why have you chosen this? And I said, well, Dad, it's kind of chosen me. And if I'm just trying to see where this is going to take me, and if I don't follow this right now, I'm sure I will always regret, leaving it behind and never seeing what it could have been.
So now you're playing the clubs. How does this transform or lead you to a recording contract?
Well, I got to a point, as I said, where I was working in New York City like 5 nights a week. And I had already sort of been through the obligatory first manager, who turns out to be kind of a scumbag, and had gotten rid of him. And a friend of mine from film school stepped in, a guy named Paul Rosselli stepped in to sort of take over as a manager. And he was the one who said, you're doing great in New York, but you really need to expand outside of New York City. Why don't you go play in Philly and try to get a gig in Boston? And let's see if you can play in, Rochester, New York, or DC. And he was the one who really urged me to expand to the Northeast in general. And so I started doing that and started building not just a New York City following, but a following throughout the whole Northeast region. And at that point, once I had sort of done a lot of the legwork myself, then people started being interested in, kind of signing me to a major label. And I met a guy in Philadelphia at a gig, a gentleman named Rob Hyman, who was in a band called the Hooters, still is actually. And he was very good friends with a gentleman named Rick Chertoff, who had been a producer for a lot of Cyndi Lauper's hits, had just had a big success with Sophie B. Hawkins, had a big hit with her, and he had just been given his own label at Mercury. So Rob made the introduction, and I went and met with Rick Chertoff, and that's who signed me to Mercury Records.
Nice. Sophie B. Hawkins, also a guest on our show.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
So you're in good company, or she's in good company, or you're sharing good company.
It's a mutual admiration society.
The Hooters was a great connection for you, right?
Oh, yeah, because the two of the guys from the Hooters who were the main songwriters and still are for that band, we ended up working together in the studio with Rick Chertoff on my first album. And it was the four of us writing the songs and arranging things. And that was the team that made the first major label record of mine, which is an album called Relish. And it had a song on it called What If God Was One of Us? And that became a big international hit song.
And that was written by Eric Bazilian, right?
Yes. Yeah. Eric Bazilian was the other member of the Hooters who was involved in that record. And he actually wrote that song all completely by himself. He woke up in the middle of the night one night and had this song sort of just land on him out of the blue. And he ran downstairs to his little 4-track recorder and made a recording of it. And he brought it in to show it to us in the studio the next day. And he said, yeah, I have this song, and I've written it for that group, the Crash Test Dummies, that Canadian band with the singer with a super low voice. And so he had recorded it in that style, in this very sort of dirgy, low vocal style. And he played that for us just to kind of say, hey, check out this thing that I did. But Rick was listening, Rick Chertoff, and he said, you're not going to give that song to the Crash Test Dummies. You're going to let Joan sing that song. And I was like, oh, no, it's fine. I don't have to, that he wants that song to go to somebody else. I don't need to, And Rick was like, no, this is a song that you are going to sing, and we're going to work on it right now. So that's how that song came to be on that record and came to be a hit for me and not the Crash Test Dummies.
Nice. Well, and Eric's been a good friend of our university here, where you're going to be playing later, Monmouth University.
Yes.
And he spoke movingly of working with you when he was here and the experience of working on that record. It sounded like it was a real team you had in place, that folks were really committed to making that record something special. What a great way to get out of the gate.
He gave you this impression that it didn't matter how long something was going to take. You needed to really explore and do things thoroughly and from the ground up. And that was a wonderful feeling to have in the studio, not like sort of looking over your shoulder and okay, we got to make this happen right away. Or I've worked with producers who, show up for 20 minutes and then they go off and play golf and they're not really actually there. So he was there all day, every day, and we were working together on it all day, every day. And I think those guys brought a very roots-based musical sensibility to the production and to the songwriting. And I brought this sort of almost like a film-based visual sense, because I just come out of film school, and a particular lyrical and poetic sense that was something that they didn't have. So it was an interesting combination of different strengths.
What a great story, because when you listen to that song and the album, for that matter, it's so well built, it's well constructed, and that song has so many layers to it. It was clearly the process of a number of folks working together and not just some demo, however good. It really has that sense to it, even down to that lovely piece of period sound that you did to the beginning. What was that again? It was...
Nell Hampton is called The Airplane Ride. And it's just this woman. I had been, digging through some record crates, and I found this, record of like old Appalachian songs, and this woman Nell Hampton had a song called "The Airplane Ride," and one of these nights in about 12 o'clock, this whole world's gonna reel and rock. Saints will tremble and cry for pain, 'cause the Lord's gonna come in his heavenly airplane. And then you go into the song, the big guitar lick for One of Us. And it just was this, a way of sort of tying that song into this tradition of these sort of fantastical, gospel songs that come out of Appalachian gospel and country gospel, but just super super down home and up in the hollers and nothing fancy about it. This was not a Nashville song.
Well, it's a inspired touch. I mean, it just, I recall the first time I heard it, I thought, wow, that Joan Osborne, what range. She just breaks into one little ditty and then, goes into this contemporary rock song. Wow.
No, that wasn't me singing that.
Although clearly you can.
Clearly I can, yes. And I have in concert at certain moments, yeah.
You mentioned your studies in film. When I listen to your records, I do hear this kind of cinematic storyteller. You do seem like a natural film student. What drew you to that genre?
I think it was a combination of being a teenager in Kentucky and sneaking out with my friends to go see midnight movies in the 70s, because that was there was this huge cultural thing of these movie houses that would show like the Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight, or a Ralph Bakshi animated version of the Lord of the Rings, or the Led Zeppelin movie The Song Remains the Same, or Harold and Maude, that great film from the 70s, or the Bette Midler concert movie Divine Miss M. You could go to these movies at midnight on Friday and Saturday and see something that was completely outside of the mainstream Hollywood film, and that I was super fascinated by. And for a kid, as I say, who grew up in Kentucky, that really kind of turned my head around, because you weren't going to get that from sitting at home and watching TV with your parents, or reading whatever the high school reading list was. It was something completely out of left field, and I really connected with that, and I appreciated that. And then when I first went to college, I had done some classes in the theater department, and I had taken a directing class and directed a show in the little black box experimental theater there, and I really enjoyed that process, and I was very engaged with it, and I thought, this is really cool. But I looked up the percentage of people in America who go see live theater, and it was like 2%. And the percentage of people who went to see films was a much larger percentage. I don't know, it was maybe like 60 or 70% of people who went to the movies. And I thought, maybe if I'm going to do this, I should work in an art form that people are actually going to support and actually going to see. And that's when I started thinking about film school and applying to NYU Film School.
It's interesting that you have such a diversity of tastes in film, because you can really hear it on your records. This, I don't know how else to put this. You kind of record what you want and what seems inspiring to you at the time. There's no form. Mm-hmm. You're not. I listen to the albums, and I don't hear you trying to make One of Us Part 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did try that for a little bit right after the Relish record came out, and I had sort of the classic sophomore slump where I couldn't come up with a follow-up that the record label liked, and I tried this and I tried that and turned things in, and they rejected it, and that was a very rough time for me, and I, in a way, it's sort of I think the cultural moment that I had sort of passed by, and by the time I got back to putting records out, not so many people were paying attention anymore. And on the one hand, that kind of sucked, but on the other hand, it sort of took some of the pressure off, and it kind of allowed me to, as you say, sort of follow my own tastes and desires in making records. I never got into doing music to become like, some big rock star. I never thought that was possible for me or even desirable. I looked at people like the blues artists who, they never had big hits necessarily, but they were continuing to work and perform into their 70s and 80s, or somebody like Tom Waits, who, had this very unique career, and, he wasn't dependent on making radio hits, but he had an audience that stayed with him, and he could always put out another record, always find people to connect with it, always do a tour, and kind of do what he wanted to do. And so those to me were the models of, the ultimate sort of success, and anything beyond that just seemed like it was pie in the sky. So I never really was focused on anything like that. And ironically, even though I did have this sort of enormous pie in the sky hit, I have kind of settled back down. I'm not wealthy or anything. I can, still have a career and still work.
Right, which is where all the fulfillment is anyway.
Yeah.
And when I look at that period, and when we study that period, right, there's so much change. I mean, you must have returned to a world that was suddenly just beset by, technology and the digital revolution, and, the whole industry is still reeling from that moment in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually am very thankful that I came up at the time that I did and in the way that I did, because, I can't really wrap my head around the way that people get known these days. And, a 15-second clip on TikTok becomes, you go viral, and it becomes, it just, that to me seems very divorced from how music can really impact you. And maybe that's just the leading edge of something that's much deeper. But I'm just happy that I was able to come up in a way where live performance was kind of everything, for me. And I was able to do that in a way that once the record label people did start coming around, I sort of knew my worth and my value, because I had been performing live and I had been doing it, all around the Northeast. And so I kind of knew what I had, and I wasn't looking for somebody else to step in and, make me famous, or, produce me and discover me and create me in some way. I sort of had done a lot of that myself, and I knew what that meant, and I knew what that was worth. And I think it must be harder for people who are trying to do it, online, to achieve that same sort of sense of self-worth, because everything seems so fleeting right now.
Sure, and there's just so much noise out there, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to find, even as listeners, right, or book readers or film goers, to find new work that we can enjoy. There's just so much.
Yeah.
Coming at us all the time.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter, who's a teenager, she, I'll ask her what she's listening to, or notice what she's listening to, and she finds things, all kinds of things, from a commercial to a movie to a TV show or whatever. Like, she gets a little snippet of something here or there. She's like, oh, that's interesting. What is that? And it comes to her through all these different channels. And like, she was listening to the Isley Brothers version of Summer Breeze the other day. Like, where does she come up? Like, I didn't introduce her to that. Where did she come up with that? So I think it's, in that way, it's kind of interesting, where instead of having these monolithic cultural moments of like, oh, all the teenagers are listening to, punk, or all the teenagers are listening to EDM, or all, whatever, it seems to be this much more random and varied, way that people get into music from all these different channels.
And it makes a kind of interesting sort of experience of kids today. I know that sounds
oh my God.
As a university professor, right? 18-year-olds are in my intro classes. I was in my Springsteen class on Monday night, and we were talking about new music, and culture and all sorts of subjects of that nature. And it's amazing how that kind of sampling of culture is where they live. They might know a lot about this and that. They may be divorced from history that I think they need to know, right? But it's interesting how they chase the things they love. So when they discover the Beatles today, it's not any different than when you and I did. They hear them, they think, wow, wait a second, that's different. I want more of that. Just you describe with your daughter. The discovery is the same, but the means is so different.
Absolutely. I mean, that's an interesting thing about, just about recorded music. And, when you think about it, you might not be the most popular artist in the moment or whatever, but you're leaving behind this sort of time capsule of what your work is. And if it has depth to it, then hopefully somebody will stumble across it, like this, in a way like we're talking about, where, something gets used in a movie snippet or it's the soundtrack for a 10-second TikTok or whatever. And then somebody's got a hold of that thread. And if they pull it and follow it, then they're going to find something that is incredibly rich. If it's someone who's, put their real heart and soul into creating what they've created.
That's wonderful. And of course, as I'm sure your daughter could tell us, part of the excitement is the chase, right? Trying to find that little bit that you heard and to get more of it.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to come out of left field, but I got to know. So I'm down in Houston, Texas when your record comes out, and I love it, and I'm, excited about it. But I recall vividly thinking, why is this woman in New York calling her album Relish? Is she trying to push hot dogs on me or some kind of...
Well, I don't know if it was the greatest choice of a title, but what the meaning of the word, one of the meanings of the word is a kind of enjoyment and a kind of, taking pleasure in something. You relish something. I relish the opportunity to listen to, B.B. King live at Cook County Jail, or, that it's that sort of intensity of enjoyment and taking time to really experience something. And so that for me was the meaning of that word. But yes, the people at the record label at that time were like, well, we'll get a jar of pickle relish and we'll put your face on it and we'll send it to the radio stations. And I'm like, don't do that. Please don't do that.
Everything Fab Four is presented by Salon.com, the premier news, politics, innovation, and arts website. For more information, visit everythingfab4.com, where you can learn more about our podcast and my latest Beatles-related book, Living the Beatles Legend, The Untold Story of Mal Evans. The Everything Fab Four theme song, Seize the Day, is provided courtesy of Black Rabbit, the high-octane Beatles cover band, an innovative psychedelic rock project from Rockaway Beach, Queens in New York City. Like what you heard today on Everything Fab Four? Be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, and recommend the show to your friends. Plus, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at EF4 Podcast. Distributed by Salon.com, Everything Fab Four is a Wonderwall production. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story.